We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. What we leave behind is not as important as how we live.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Welcome back, everybody, to Make It So, a dedicated Star Trek Picard podcast on the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host, Tony Black, as per usual, but I'm not joined by my co-host this week, Kurt North, who's still off on his Section 31 mission. He'll hopefully, come back alive and well. But I've got a very special guest in his stead, as appropriately my number one for this podcast, because I'm very delighted to be joined to discuss her new Star Trek Picard novel, The Last Best Hope, the one and only Una McCormack.
Hello there. Hello. I promise I haven't bumped off your co-host. It's not it's not a kind of Garrick hasn't got me to do something strange.
Oh, well, we've all seen the tiny little Garak you carry around with you.
Oh, he goes everywhere. He's just come back from America with me, so he had a lovely trip to Los Angeles. So he's got a bit of a suntan. He enjoyed the heat.
Yeah, I bet he did. He's had a nice holiday, you see, so maybe he's ready to do some assassination. So, I'm not sure.
He's nice and rested, so he's ready to just, get on and do some random poisoning or something.
But no, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your book, which many of us have read since it came out. And as we record, I think it came out just over a week ago, so it's still fairly fresh in the mind's eye.
Yes.
But I thought the best way to start off, Una, if you're okay, is to summarise The Last Best Hope. Give it a little bit of a précis, in your own words, in the best way you can.
Right, okay. Well, it's what's funny about talking about this book is that I still feel like I'm under non-disclosure agreement. So I feel like I'm not allowed to talk about it, but I actually am now. People are reading it. Very simply put, it's a prequel novel to the series. So it is concerned, it's set about 14 or so years before Picard, and it concerns Picard's involvement with the Romulan relief mission and how that unfolds and what happens and why it ends less well than he would have liked, I think it's the way of describing it. So it's a prequel novel to the show, and the people who write and produce and look after this program were very thoughtful about when we should release it, and it came out, if I recall correctly, it came out between episodes 3 and 4.
I think so.
And I think people really found that they really enjoyed having seen episode 3, coming into the book and then going into episode 4, and they'd been introduced to, I'm going to assume that people who are listening to this podcast are up to date, that they'd visited Vashti and they'd sort of seen and met Zani and met Elnor. And I think it was a real sort of, oh, wow, we just read about these in the book. Having said that, I think you could read it at any point. You could probably read it before you'd seen the show. And you could read it at any point, I think, because it is a prequel. It's set well before the program starts. So prequel novel.
Well. It's funny you should mention Elnor and that storyline, because once I'd watched Absolute Candor, the first thing I did was message Kurt and say, I think I was about maybe 100 pages into the book, because I got it on release day, and I started reading, and I was getting increasingly sucked in, and I said, I think we're going to see when Picard first meets Elnor. And Kurt had read all the book by this point, because he sped through it really fastly, and he just texted me back with a little smiley face.
I say nothing. He's also under the non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very much a prequel. I think obviously it's one of those things, guys. If you're listening to this, we're assuming that you've read the book, or you're in the middle of reading the book, or if you're going to read the book, all I would say is that we're going to talk generally about the book. We're going to talk about things in it, maybe a little bits of spoilers, some questions. So on your own head be it, I suppose.
Assume spoilers, yeah. It's impossible to go, the book, yes, contents unrevealed. It's so, yeah. Assume the spoilers from here on. We'll even do the dots for you. Dot. Right, spoilers now.
Yeah, spoiler zone. Because that's the thing. Even though it's you quite nicely there summarised it in as non-spoilery a fashion as you could do, really. and it's but it is a book that is full of detail. It's a very wide-spanning book. It covers quite a few years. It covers lots of different characters, lots of different plot lines. Yep. So it is very much a book that, in a way, is difficult to discuss because I suppose in some ways it's hard to summarise, like other spin-off Star Trek books that have they go to a planet, an adventure happens, etc. It's not that kind of book, is it? It's much more wide-spanning. It
is, yes. I saw someone, I saw a review that said, this could have been as great as War and Peace. Oh, thank you very much. I'll take that one.
That is good, yeah.
But they felt it could have been much, much longer, and I only had 100,000 words. I didn't have, however, 500,000 that Tolstoy had. But it's covering about 5 years, and it does cover a very wide range of characters, some of whom people will know already. They will know Picard, they will know Geordie LaForge, some of whom they're getting to know. We're going to Raffi's point of view, for example, and some who are just sort of originals to this book. There's various scientists and other players who are just scientists in particular who are just players in this book. Politicians, I think we see a few of. We get a little bit more detail on Clancy, who we met in the show at the start. Not all these characters necessarily meet or even know of each other. My hope was to give it not just a broad sweep in time, but a sense of a really vast area and a vast number of people who are being affected by this crisis. And I hope I've managed to do that. I think that reviewer was right that I could easily have tripled the size of this book, I think. Yeah. One writer that I admire a great deal is Stephen King. And in my favourite book of his, The Stand, I think he does this extremely well. He has this sort of huge cast of characters, not all of whom connect together, and some of whom only put in very brief appearances. So I hope there's enough that people think there are satisfying story arcs for each of these people. Oh, Bruce Maddox and Agnes Jurati we see as well. They're very important to it. So I hope people feel that they get good stories for each of these characters, but we're covering a lot of ground. So I hope they feel it has this good epic feel as well.
Well, I really felt that, and you mentioned The Stand, and I could have happily read 1,000 words of this, Una. I really could, not 1,000 words, 1,000 pages. Sorry.
I'd have done it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the first things I said when I was talking about it with people after I'd read it was, this could have been a series in itself. This could have been season 1, I almost think, or like a prequel series to Picard, actually, because the span of it, having, going on a mission like this, going into the Romulan territory, saving all these lives with all these alternate plot lines with Geordie, with, Bruce Maddox, as you say, with, I think it's Vritet, the Romulan scientist, and Safadi on Earth with everything. And obviously we'll talk about all these characters, but it has a real ensemble. Maybe this is intentional, you can tell me, but almost like a TV series feel to this book. I don't know if that was an intent on your part.
I think it's always an intent when you do TV tie-in novels. I think you kind of owe it to the reader to make it feel like the show in some way, that it's got some kind of tone or aspect of the show. I mean, that the joy of novels is that you're not bound to the format. So you don't. Most TV episodes have a kind of plot of the week that needs to be resolved, and I possibly chapter by chapter, maybe you get that feel. There's maybe a focus on a specific event or something, but it is a novel, so there's more that you can do. You can certainly, obviously, narrate much more about people's internal thinkings, their kind of internal workings, what they're thinking and feeling, and what they're missing. Ideally, people will sort of be reading, going, "Oh, they've not thought about this," or they might be reading some characters and going, "This guy's a jerk." Yeah. Not that this guy realises it's Bruce Maddox, I'm thinking of you. But, they hopefully the reader will kind of be going, oh, there's more to this than perhaps this character is telling me or letting on to themselves. So all of these things you can do in novels, but ideally you want people to feel like they're experiencing something that's congruent with the show, that's tonally similar. So if it's done that, I'm really pleased.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. I mean, when Bruce Maddox turned up, again, well, there were two instances where I immediately messaged Kerr and also our mutual friend Duncan Barrett, who I will say thank you for this podcast because he connected you and I up a little bit more. And I messaged him over two things. I messaged those guys. One of them was, Bruce Maddox is in the book. And I was like, oh, fantastic, because we're going to learn more about this. And the other one was, and this is a big spoiler, guys, just bear in mind what we've said, Captain Worf.
Yes, indeed.
And I was so excited. I was so excited.
I think that's the thing I've got the most positive feedback on. There's been a kind of great roar to the heavens that justice has finally been done, and he's not being punished anymore. There's been a lot of positive response to that. So I'm really glad.
Well, how much has Michael Dorn paid you? Because ultimately this is Captain Worf series. One of those
non-disclosure agreements.
But it was wonderful. It was wonderful to read those things and to see that expansion, because a big question on everyone's mind, I think, going into Picard was, well, who's the captain of the Enterprise? Where is the Enterprise? What's going on? I know this is many years later that Picard begins, and I think Worf, it's about 2381, I think, when he takes over. But then we were guesstimating, we were going, and you may know the answer to this, Una, you might not be able to tell me, but we were going, does that mean Worf's still in command? Picard was in command for like 16, 17 years of two Enterprises. So, Worf could still be captain in 2399. And that's what this book does, I think.
He could be.
He could be, couldn't he? And you play very coy there, you see. Yeah, yes. Very good. Yeah. But this is it. It spirals off all these questions as a reader and it expands out the universe. And I think that is one of the great things about the book. So in that sense, I mean, obviously you've written lots of tie-in books previously, going back to things like the DS9 tie-in novels, like the Cardassia focus novels and Hollow Man, and then things like the Typhon Pact novels and The Fall, and then Enigma Tales and all these things that you've built out worlds around the 24th century and beyond with your Discovery novel. But how does this differ? What was there a particular difference in writing The Last Best Hope compared to all these other books where you have gone into a lot of detail with the world building and ensemble characters and things like that?
The big difference, and I'd experienced a little bit of this. I did a Discovery novel as well, with about Tilly, Way to the Stars. So the big difference for me was working alongside a show that was in production. So the books that I've done before were the shows had been off air, so DS9 had finished, and that was partly, I think, why we were able to build these quite complicated storylines. That this was where Trek was happening. Yeah. So we were able to sort of I had free reign on Cardassia Prime. It was great. It was just me and Garrett kind of frolicking around the ruins, going, "Yippee! We can do what we like." And how we use our powers for evil? No, we shall maybe use them for good occasionally. So I had that's just amazing, isn't it? That's just incredible. So much fun. And then this was really exciting in a really different way. That was kind of working very closely with people who were working on the show, receiving scripts to be able to, know what was happening. And that was completely different. I found out I had to work with their ideas, and which we were doing, working alongside, keeping the things like The Fall worked very tightly with a group of writers. But it felt really exciting and interesting and creative in a different way. And of course, I hadn't seen the show because it was being made. So I thought, we want it to feel like the show. So it was nerve-wracking, but exciting and creative and collaborative in a really, really interesting way. And the people making this and the people that I kind of worked on the outline and on the book, they love Trek so much, and things like they know it matters about Worf, and they know it matters about who captains the Enterprise. And these were things we sat and thought about and talked about because we wanted people to feel they'd had an answer. And sometimes you make creative decisions and people get behind it, or they go, I'm not sure I would have done it that way. And, you know, you go, well, that we had to make a creative decision, and these are the reasons why, and, you know, this is what comes out. We work very hard, and just things like, you know, releasing the book between those two episodes, that's probably when people will enjoy it most, or they'll get the most from it. So for me, I think the difference was that the show was in production, that I was learning about it. When I did the Tilly book, Discovery had already been on screen for a season, so I had more to visually work from. So I think that was the big difference. It was sort of, am I getting this right? Will this be okay? Will people like this? And I hope I'm not breaking it already. So hopefully it's worked. Hopefully, yeah. Yeah,
it feels very in step with what we're seeing on screen, I think, and I mean, it helps obviously that you know, the character of Picard is so well established, and I felt you captured his voice really, really well. I felt you really saw a transformation from him, from the Picard that we remember at the end of Nemesis, and somebody who's very settled in his life and in his role, and that he thinks he knows where his future's going. And then, you know, it's that you bookend it with him on the chateau and him looking back and thinking, I was a damned fool, you know, and all these kind of things about some of the decisions I made, and some of the hubris and some of the arrogance. And I mean, when you were outlining it, was that a key central character arc you wanted to underpin this with, Picard going from that position to that position?
Yes, that was absolutely critical. And we wanted, and I had to make that kind of plausible, because I think Picard in our minds signifies the best of humanity. You know, there's a wisdom to him, and a measuredness, a moderation, a thoughtfulness. I remember I was partway through the book. Now, when you're writing a book like this, particularly when it's very, very complex and you're getting very deep into the mind of someone, you often have to sort of surface and go, right, is this heading in the right direction? And just as I was sort of, you know, you sometimes feel you're losing your way, or am I doing it right? And I found that quotation. I'm not sure which episode it's from off the top of my head, and I was able to use it as an epigram for the book. It's possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness, that is life. And it's a Picard quotation. I haven't got the episode to hand, so my brain is fried. Someone will remember off the top of their head.
Oh yeah.
It was almost like a validation. Yes, it was. You know, even the best of us making the best decisions that they can for the best reasons, because I think he's always making decisions that are driven by a respect for life and a concern for preserving life. But we live in a bounded universe. We live in a finite universe, and Picard's immense humanity hits up against these boundaries for the first time in his life, I think. But possibly, I mean, he's a reckless young man, and I think that's a different lesson. But I think to be at the height of your powers and to find that you've hit limits must be a very difficult thing to come back from. And that was the story that mattered to me to tell.
Was it a, I suppose, to use a tortured metaphor, the whole chicken and the egg thing in terms of what came first in terms of this whole story arc? I mean, you've mentioned it a little bit earlier about how you were going off a lot of what they were creating, obviously, but how much ultimately do you think you brought to the show Picard based on the plotting of this with, you know, Kirsten Beyer and everyone else who might have been involved, you know, on the side of the writing team and things like that? So has it been quite fluid in terms of what you may have contributed based on some of these ideas to what we saw?
All of their work is immense. You know, there's creating a television show is just a massive undertaking. Not just creative, but the marshalling of resources and people, and, you know, building sets and stuff, and, you know, getting people from point A to point B on the right day and having lines for them so that they can speak them, ideally with time to learn them and rehearse them. Oh, and what I did was sit in a room for 8 weeks. Tell a story. All the kind of brilliance is I don't know how those guys do it. and I get to go wee, I'm like, wow, brilliant. And within the constraints, obviously, of the show and the characters that we had, I had considerable freedom. There are quite a lot of original characters there as well. So I tried to find stories that thematically echoed the central story of Picard. So Raffi's story, again, I think is about hitting this limitation and not being able to see your way out of it. There are several images of things like mazes throughout the book, of sort of hitting, not being able to find a way through, I think. So, all the cleverness is over there, and I just got to have a lot of fun.
I think you're selling yourself short a little bit there, because like you say about mazes. I mean, what's one of the things that came out of some of the feedback, and when we were discussing the book on the podcast we did talking about the book, we were talking about that scene towards the end with the Romulan governor who won't let his people leave, even though the supernova is on approach and it's all going a bit apocalyptic, and the whole the way you actually build out the Romulan architecture of his house, and how it's all doors that don't lead anywhere, or there's a secret way in, and the layout of it is remarkable, and it's fascinating to read that scene. That and I suppose that's where you talk about freedom in a book to create. That kind of scene might seem arbitrary in a story on screen. They might not have time to go into that kind of depth and do something that abstract. But in the book, it sort of adds to flesh out the kind of expansion of Romulan culture that we're seeing on screen, but it can do it in a different way. So that must have been thrilling to do for you.
That was great, and that was often maybe guidance that I was receiving, or suggestion that I was receiving, but hopefully I ran with it. And that's the great thing about novel writing, is that you can take what might be a split second on screen or in a script and kind of run with it. The chronophage that he has in his house, the thing that eats time, is a thing in Cambridge city centre, and we regularly it's perched on a corner of a building. It's kind of set in the corner of a building of a really busy bit of Cambridge, right near King's College, and people just gathering. Traffic is held up, and bikes can't get past, and pedestrians are kind of weaving through. You know what locals are like in a tourist town. Flipping tourists, elbow, and there's always, maybe 20, 30 people kind of standing there taking pictures. And it is genuinely one of the most hideous things. And Cambridge has got some pretty hideous sculptures dotted around it, really bad sculpture. But I think this is one of the most hideous. It's very intricate. It's very beautifully made. It's this kind of big brass clock with this monstrous insect kind of eating away. So it's very kind of arresting, but it's really hideous. So I thought, I'm just going to get that in the book and complain about it. So, but again, this kind of idea of something, something monstrous that's destructive and relentless, which is how the mission comes to feel. There's a terrible thing looming, and people are doing the best they can to stop people getting eaten, basically. So that's where I pinched that. Just steal everything. I'm walking around going, I'll have that in a book. I'll have that in a book. I'll have that in a book. And filter it away, and it pops out eventually.
So many writers always say things like that about how everything is stored in the mind folder.
This
for
whole
use.
Conversation is being stored in the mind folder.
Oh my god! Maybe the name Tony Black will crop up in one of your novels.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind that, Una. That'd be okay.
Okay, all right. I'll put some apostrophes and exclamation marks, so it looks a bit alien.
Yeah, do it. But yeah, I mean, it's just really interesting hearing about your thought process there and everything like that. So I think what, in terms of some of the overlap, what I was thinking about was examples of, say, Raffi. When you mentioned Raffi, her son and her husband, and we've obviously seen her son Gabe now in episode 5, Stardust City Rag, which is the last one as we record that's been out. And after I'd read the book, I'm watching the show with my wife. And and she was saying, I wonder why Raffi's going to Free Cloud. I said, I know why she's going to Free Cloud. She's going to find her son. And she was like, what son? I said, you've not read The Last Best Hope, have you?
You have not read the TV's. Ideally, you would have read this between episodes 3 and 4.
Exactly. And when Gabe turned up, I was like, yes, excellent. And it's things like that. And I suppose I'm assuming that the ship, the Verity, was named after your daughter. Or had you had that maybe in mind at the time? Things like that.
Certainly a remarkable coincidence, isn't it?
But it's those kind of overlap things. I'm wondering, were you given a note that said Raffi's got a son and a husband, and we want to see the backstory of that, or did you go to them and say maybe Raffi has a son? Maybe they, what kind of process was it like that?
Oh, that was scripted. Yeah.
Right.
So,
okay.
So we knew that the story had to build to what we were going to see in that episode. Yeah. So yes, and then I was writing this book over the summer holiday, which meant that rather than spending time with my little girl, I was kind of sitting writing this novel, thinking, oh, Raffi. really feeling this. It's like they're off doing stuff, and what's Mummy doing today? Is she joining in the fun? No, Mummy's going to work. Mummy's got an important meeting with Admiral Picard. So some of the kind of guilt that you have, saying I can't come out to play today over the summer holiday. So some of that goes into that story as well, I think.
Well, no, and again, you can feel that kind of thing. And this interestingly brought up a conversation we've had in our Facebook group about canon versus non-canon, and the whole
dear,
which is always a good topic, isn't it? But the whole idea of that. As soon as I read The Last Best Hope, in my head this is canon, and we were discussing how nothing is ever canon until it's actually on screen. Which is the classic edict for particularly Star Trek, which is understandable.
Which makes me canon, of course. So
well, exactly. You are now canon. And if you're canon, so for me, so should The Last Best Hope be. So it was really nice to see, Gabe canonized that character, obviously, but obviously you knew that was going to happen. But it was how do you because obviously you've written lots of the now they were never canon, were they? The like the Fall and the Typhon Pact and things like that. But for lots of people, they were. For years when they thought that we weren't going to get a Picard show or a 24th Century show, that whole massively in-depth, fantastic series of novels felt like the universe and the canonical thing for a lot of people. So when you're writing something like this, how do you approach that subject? In terms of what might be canon, what might not be canon, and does that hinder or does that enhance for you as a writer what you're doing?
I never think about it. Doesn't even cross my mind. I know that, and I know this really matters to people, so I don't want to sort of offend people. Right, okay, I want to say that first. I genuinely don't think about it, and I don't know if it's something to do with my background as a fan fiction writer. Which is what I was for many years, and continue to be with my Lord of the Rings Tolkien fanfiction habits hobby. But what I find very powerful about storytelling is going back to stories that meant something to you at one part of your life, and then being able to retool or reuse them later in your life. I guess because they are stories for me, I feel that they have this sort of lovely malleability, and it's part of my pleasure is in seeing these things change and evolve. It's fun. So I'll use the example of writing Tolkien stuff. It's fun to work within the confines of that world. So it's really good fun when you're a Tolkien fan fiction writer. Go, aha! But this story does not work because between the 13th of March and the 16th of March of 3019 of the Third Age, these things were happening. And that's part of the fun. Yeah, it's part of the intellectual pleasure. At the same time, it's fun to use those constraints to tell as many different variations as you possibly can. But no, this would work, or this would work, and it's a way of keeping the story fresh. And I actually think it's I think it's a really pivotal moment in a set of stories when a new generation comes back and starts retooling and reusing them, because I think it starts to say something about how much power and life these stories have in them. So I find it really heartening that a new generation wants to come back and tell its version of Trek. That something about this set of stories, this ensemble, this milieu, has moved them powerfully, and they want to tell and retell. It's like the Arthurian stories, or retelling of Homeric myths, or something like that. Something about this milieu and this ensemble, or this extended ensemble, has moved people sufficiently to want to put their own stamp on it. And so I don't worry so much about canon. What worries me, or not what worries me, but what motivates me, is to tell as authentic and as good a story as possible. And for this novel, that was to keep it congruent with Star Trek Picard, and at the same time to deliver a novel that I could open and go, I'm pleased with this. I'm proud of that. I think that works quite well. So I don't know if that answers or dodges your question, but I'm from as well as being a kind of fan fiction writer who's going, canon? Tear it apart. My background's also in things like Doctor Who, where somebody gave us, I think it was one of the writers on the show said, if a writer on the show says it must be true, there is no canon. So we all had permission then to kind of not obey authority.
Yeah.
So I understand how important it is and how invested people become in stories. And love that feeling of it all meshing. It's very, very satisfying. You know, I'm a Tolkien fan, and at the same time, I think people can take heart that these stories are getting a new lease of life, and that might mean that some writers go, I can't get that to work and be authentic to the story that I want to tell you. And for me, the story and the authenticity has to come first. So that's a very long way of saying, please don't hate me.
Oh, of course not. I mean, everyone does have different views on canon. I mean, I personally, for me, it's more about the head canon in many ways. I mean, I do love details to sync up, and in my head, I'm imagining The Last Best Hope is what happened, is pretty much what happened, and hopefully things on screen will confirm, X, Y, and Z particularly, and it's done that for certain things, absolutely, but so I think it's all about trying to adopt what you want to feel is canon as best as possible, really.
I had a friend back when I was a Blake Seven fan, in the 90s, and we were. The lovely thing about Blake Seven is that it kind of Blake Seven fandom is that it mixes that kind of obsessive minutiae of the detail of the production and all the tiny bits and pieces of the world building with really, really brilliant fan fiction that's really inventive, because the world is quite sketchily drawn. And he could not accept. There's an episode called Dawn of the Gods, and he said it. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care if it was on screen. It's not canon. As far as I'm concerned, there are 51 episodes of Blake Seven, and something that happened on a Tuesday night once in 1980. So he couldn't get it to fit in his own kind of sense of the authentic, what mattered most about this world and these stories. That's fine by me. If he wants to kind of deny that, go for it. And that way he derived meaning and pleasure and creativity from the other 51 episodes.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's coming up when we talk about Picard and the maybe even the newest era of Trek, that sort of began with Discovery, is there is and this is something that I'm in my very late 30s, so I was around in the 90s when I was a young lad, and I was seeing how it took people a while to warm to things like Deep Space Nine, when that first came out. And there is a little bit of a back and forth right now about whether some people are feeling like what we're seeing in some of Picard and some of Discovery is quote unquote Star Trek, or it's a different, because it is taking different approaches, it is doing things in different ways, and it's interesting to hear those conversations. And I'm wondering how, well, firstly, how you feel about that as a, not just somebody who's involved with the production of these things in your way, but as a fan, and how you may have approached that when you were writing the book, because the book does feed into this whole idea of impending doom, impending apocalypse. By the end, I'm Romulus. I really got that feel of, oh my God, this is really going to hell, and and then Picard begins in this very dark place. So do you feel Trek has shifted? Do you feel that we're in a new era where the stories are going to change, whether they're canon, they're not canon, and how do you approach that, really?
Trek is above all a reflection on the American experiment. It's a product of a particular culture, and it's a product, when it starts, of a particular moment, the kind of high point of American optimism. And I don't think we're in that place now. We're looking at a situation where presidents can manifestly have broken the law, and senators can say we just don't care. We're not going to do anything about it. This is a really, really frightening time for the American experiment, and it's a fascinating experiment, an experiment in liberty, an experiment in self-reliance. And I think maybe it was easier to tell stories of optimism in the middle of the 60s. And I think what stories that are concerned with Trek, for me, is a story about how the best people live in the best way. And sometimes the situations that we find ourselves in are not the best situations. And that's what really tests us, I think. And Picard is among the best, and he finds himself in a situation that is appalling. And this is a test of his own personal strength and of the strength of his society and its institutions. And I think that's a really, really valuable story to tell. I think it's a really important story to tell. If Trek is, and it always has, held this mirror up to the American dream, I think it's easy to reflect a dream back, and it's vital to reflect back a nightmare. And I think it's a really courageous thing to do, actually. And all power to them. I think, I feel maybe that if we were doing something about the boundless exploration of space, first of all, I think it's ground we've covered in Trek. And I wonder if it would have felt consolatory or escapist. And Trek never did that for me. It was always, I was a Next Gen fan before I was a DS9 fan. I love DS9. I love what it did in things like Paradise Lost and so on. It's all there before the current round of programs. But things like Measure of a Man, held up this mirror and asked us to reflect seriously on questions about personhood and slavery and the use that we make of other forms of life. It always had this edge. When it was at its best, it always had this edge of holding up this mirror and saying, are we sure we like what we see here? And that's the point of science fiction to me, and the point of utopian science fiction. All the best utopias have ambiguity in them, and they change, and they need to be nurtured and cultivated. People need to participate. You can't just go, oh no, we're living in the best society, because things fall apart. Entropy, entropy at the very least will be setting in, and then we have to kind of live. We have to participate in managing the consequences of that, and trying to better the world around us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it really does. No, it really does. It's a really great answer, because I think you're so right in so much of that. And I think one of the great things about the book is that you feel, you say that entropy, and you feel that idea that maybe, when we left by the end of Nemesis, by that point, we maybe thought that this was the utopia, that the 24th century, that Roddenberry was so keen for to be this, peaceful place where there was no conflict. And DS9 challenged that, and you had all these different things. But we maybe felt like, oh, okay, we've got there with that. And maybe that's why there was a sense that Trek was going to move into different areas to explore other things. But, if that was reflecting our hope that maybe we'd done it and we got there, we've reached a point now where it's, like you say, reflecting back, and we're feeling that didn't quite happen. And that's something that's happened in Picard's world. And that's what the book really does with, Starfleet falling into this absolute fear and everything. And I think one of the things that I felt reading the book was, I'd read it obviously after Maps and Legends, where you meet Clancy for the first time. And I felt like I liked her much more after reading The Last Best Hope, because I felt like I understood a much more conflicted woman.
She's trying to hold something together.
Exactly.
That really matters, that is falling apart. I think it was really important to make Clancy make her clear, because she was effectively the antagonist.
Yeah.
And of course, we're always going to be on Picard's side.
Yeah.
He's Picard, so she had to be, and it's like she can feel this thing crumbling, and it's falling apart in her between her fingers. She's trying to hold it together, and people that she admires are not understanding, or she feels they're not understanding. And I think it's it mattered to make her sympathetic. I think it mattered to make everyone sympathetic in some way. Yeah.
But it really fleshed her out. So I felt like, retrospectively, when I watched Maps and Legends again, and there was already a lot of comments about how much as, we love Picard, he was a bit cheeky going in there and saying, well, I'll just have a ship and I'll just be demoted to captain, and that's fine.
I know.
Everyone was a bit like, it's a bit cheeky, Jean-Luc.
Yuck, mate.
Yeah. And but the way, obviously, she was very strong and very, sheer, effing hubris and all this kind of thing was... And like you say, she was the antagonist. She was immediately, hackles are going to be raising. You don't speak to Picard like that. But when you read the book, you realise that she, like you say, she saw this crumbling. They had this fractious relationship, but there was a respect there. And she felt that respect for Picard. And I think vice versa by the end of The Last Best Hope. And they were in difficult situations. And I think the book gets that across really well, as it does, like I said before, this apocalypse. And was it exciting? Was it quite thrilling to through the character of Vritet, mainly the Romulan scientist? Was it exciting to depict this classic Trek civilization in ruin? Or
it was really depressing. It's a really, really sad story. He's sort of
very tragic.
He's isolated, and he's picked off in a way, and he doesn't believe himself by the end. He's sort of completely gaslighted, or they do the kind of, there are four lights on him,
Yeah, they really do, don't they?
They really do, don't they? Yeah, you're quite sure that's what you've seen. Have a little think about that, because we're not so sure. Yeah, I found that a really depressing story. So not exciting, no, horrible. And he's kind of going, all that, I just don't want to. I suppose it's a bit like how we are about climate change. Yes, I know there are these really awful things happening, but I just want to go to the co-op and get a toffee crisp.
But it's funny you should mention the climate change, because that's something that really stood out to me, in that you manage to, through Romulus, you really get that the allegory for the impending doom for us of climate change, and the fact that we're not reacting quick enough, and there's lots of disinformation out there, and governments who are ignoring advice and willfully, and that whole idea of disinformation. I kept thinking, how Romulus are reacting is exactly how, like, say, a North Korea would react to a climate change event that is going to completely destroy them. And I thought, we've only ever seen the supernova from that, Star Trek 09 perspective of this great big wave crashing through everything. But this gets into the the actual effects on Romulus as a civilization, as a planet, as a ecosystem. And I loved that. And I thought that was really a really powerful allegory for what we're seeing today in Australia and all these places around the world.
And these, it's certainly a story that it's a kind of story that matters a great deal to me. I think there's, if you're in the firing line of something, there's not much you can do about that. It's like, bosh, gone. Yeah, okay, that's bloody bad luck. Yeah. There are things that can be done so we can manage our response better. We can get aid to places better. So I'm thinking of something like the that awful Christmas Day tsunami.
Yeah.
There's very little you can do. And literally, you kind of go, whoa, that's a big wave, if you're there, and that's it. But immediately, I think, and what humans are very good at when they put their mind to it is mobilising in a very, very clever and wide-scale way. So early warning systems and this kind of thing, or mobilising just incredible things that we do. Like I know, let's mobilise and eradicate smallpox. Amazing. That's incredible. We don't talk about that. I think we talk about human achievement like, Elon Musk put a car in space. It's like, fantastic. Amazing. Right, where does that leave me? But, a bunch of people got together and eradicated smallpox. That's incredible. It's an amazing human achievement. I was in Geneva at the end of last year. I visited the Large Hadron Collider. And that's another one. We've dug a massive pit and assembled a giant magnet. It's so hubristic in a way. You kind of go, this is like building a cathedral, except, it's at least as beautiful as a cathedral. Now we know something about the Big Bang. We know something about the fundamentals of the universe. Or as well in Geneva, there's the Red Cross and Crescent headquarters and museum, and you go, that's amazing. A bunch of people decided to set up an organisation that protected the weak and vulnerable. And they've had missteps, and the museum is very good at documenting this. But incredibly brave people, and again, it's the whole first chapter is about this. It's kind of about the mobilisation of resources, and just people in procurement going, those tents aren't going to work in this temperature,
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, they were rubbish on Cardassia, weren't they? Yeah. So, and people are very good at this kind of thing. I think they're really unsung, these people. So, whilst I hope the book simultaneously kind of interrogates hubris, I hope it's also going, there are actually lots of people that gather together, do really quite remarkable things. And they're not high profile, but they're extremely effective. And we're actually very, if there is an optimistic element to this book, it's that we can, when we put our mind to it, gather and do remarkable things. And sometimes it falls apart, and we have to pick up again after that. I think
it's the attempt, isn't it? It's the trying, that's so important. And I think a good example of that optimistic character as well, who is fighting against disinformation and the sheer wave of everything is Safadi, Dr. Safadi, who and obviously based in Cambridge, and I mean she must have been a very, and in fact I came out of the book and one of the things I said was I'd love to see her in the show, because I thought she was really well characterised. It'd be great if she came in some way, maybe to explain this mystery of the Romulan sun, something like that. But yeah, she was a really good character. So did you approach her, obviously, as a new character, I believe, that you've created for this book, from that vantage point of somebody, in that sort of way of optimism and trying to overcome these forces?
Yes, and she's obviously the kind. She's obviously structurally meant to mirror Fritette, because they're both scientists, and they're both working on the same problem. But science, which again is another great collaborative human endeavour stretching across centuries, is absolutely depends on openness of information, the kind of free exchange of information, freely given and freely scrutinised. And if you cocked up, you kind of go, her hands up. Let's check that over again, because it has to. It's really complicated, So you need people. Well, did I get too much in my own headspace? And she's got an ideal situation there. She's got a great team. She's kind of like, guys, take a look at these sums, right? Oh, take a look at these sums. Let's get the guys along, right? They'll have a little look. Okay, let's get a load of people in to discuss it. And he's Vrittet is the kind of opposite of that. He's working within a system that's paranoid and that doesn't share information and is scrutinised. The people are just watching him. He's got secret sensors and this kind of thing, hasn't he? Because they're monitoring the data he gets in. So she kind of epitomised what I think of as she's in a propitious situation as well. I mean, she's in an open society that values these principles and values sort of freedom and openness. There are various institutional pressures. Obviously the security services are interested in her and the politicians want things from her. And I think she plays them quite well. She's got management support, which is always good if your line manager's behind you. So I think they're meant to you're meant to look at them and go, well, this is a situation in which information can flourish. And this is a situation in which it will wither. But even then, she's not. I was rereading the book and I'd forgotten that sort of her last thought in the book is she's constantly worried about what happened to him and never finds out. She's really sad now.
It is sad.
It's quite relief, isn't it? But the scale, the barriers between them are just, and what should be free and open communication, the institutional, the cultural, the social barriers are just too vast. So she's a sort of uncomplicated heroine. I think she does make one mistake, which is that I think she writes to him, and that's born of optimism. It's almost the cruelest mistake of the book in a way. She sort of makes an open gesture, but it puts him at risk because that's not how it will be read and received. So not everyone is so maybe she's a little careless in that respect, but it's not born out of cruelty. It's born out of not imagining the bad, I think, which isn't necessarily if I do this, then maybe it will work or help. And it's that Picard quote again, isn't it? You can do everything right and things don't turn out right.
Don't always turn out that way. Definitely.
It's a complicated place.
This is true. This is very true. So we've got some fan listener feedback from the Make It So podcast fan group on Facebook from a bunch of people. To be honest, Una, a lot of this is people asking questions about things they want to know, which you may or may not be able to answer, but we'll see. But there's just a lot of excitement for the book and a lot of people who have really enjoyed it, I think.
That's really kind. Thank you.
Okay, so Mel asks, the very first thing that comes to my mind is if she's planning any other Picard-related books. Is there anything you can tell us? Or do you know if there are any other Picard-related books that might be coming out?
I know nothing.
Well-schooled answer there.
I had a joke when just after it was announced, and I did the Trek convention up in Birmingham, and people were asking about it, and I would say, and it got to be a joke across the weekend, I can confirm that I am writing Star Trek Picard novel, which I can't do anymore. I can confirm that I have written. I know nothing. Yeah,
you know nothing. But one of the things that she did bring up, which I was going to ask you about, was the characters of Laris and Zhaban, who have a very brief mention, I think, in the book. And obviously there is the IDW comic series, the 3-part comic series, which explores how they came to meet Picard and that mission where he's on the Verity and he's with Raffi. I was wondering how much crossover there might have been there. Did you do any crossover work with Mike Johnson and Kirsten Beyer about that story, which sort of is within the scope of what the events in your book?
We didn't cross over in terms of storylines. Originally, we thought of putting Laris and Zhaban in the book, and then it turned into this story. So we get the story at the end. We expanded it very differently about Khurram and his aide Malula. And I think what we were hoping that would do would sort of feel like a precursor to the story of Laris and Shaban, that he kind of Picard fails to save this life. And that kind of feeds into why it might be so much more, why it would be so critical. It might be at the back of his mind, perhaps. So we sort of did talk about having them in the book, and then realised that it was better in the comics. So that's why they're just sort of passing characters.
Because one of the interesting approaches with this is that it's been multimedia, and that you've seen things in your book and you've seen things in the comic and on screen. And it's been a really immersive experience in that way, which has been really enjoyable if you've read all of them. It's just interesting to consider that, really. Our friend Duncan Barrett says, I love this book and I only wish they'd released it a few weeks earlier. I think he was hoping to read it before the before the show. I know Una was shown scripts for the show while she was working on it. I'm curious to know, when she finally sat down to watch it, was there anything on screen that wasn't on the page, and what surprised you most about seeing the finished product? And he does also say, who blew up the Romulan sun? You might be able to answer one of those. Maybe not the other.
I can confirm that I have written a. I was just so excited to see it. I was honestly, I was like a little kid in the candy store. I was just really excited to see it. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Just kind of uncomplicatedly, it's been one of the most enjoyable creative experiences of my life. It's just been brilliant from start to finish. It was quite a fast write, and the scripts were changing, so I was getting new versions of scripts because that's how television is made. So it was quite nerve-wracking. But that seemed to tap into that. I think I'll thrive under pressure. Not too much, but the right kind. So it just made it a very creative experience for me. I just really enjoyed it. As for the rest, I can confirm that I have written.
Yeah, there's so many open questions which are really good from people. Craig McKenzie says he hasn't yet read the book. He's going to, but he's curious about Time Media. He said, how do writers like Una of Time Media deal with the idea that what they're writing can only be so significant in the context of the product it ties into, as in they can only go so far with reveals, only reference things that will serve as background to the show. Is it limiting to a writer to deliver a story that is essentially subservient to another one? And we've kind of covered this in the discussion earlier about canon, but it is an interesting question for people, I suppose, who don't really know the intricacies of this kind of approach in writing something alongside a TV series.
Yeah. Yes, I think I'd sort of give the same answer. I just have a lark doing this. It's so much fun. It really, really is. I can't believe I get away with it. It really is as a job. Nobody told me that was a job. That was fantastic. Yes, I shall do that all day, please. So I have a lark, and as I say, I don't really think in terms of canonicity or subservience or that kind of thing. I'm here to tell the very, very best story that I can, and I enjoy the constraints. I find it a sort of it's like sort of if somebody write a story, well give me a couple of parameters. It's blank page is really scary, but constraints are I always find extremely. I like thinking through ways around them. Without breaking them. So I've just dropped on. It's just something I'm really. I say this a lot, but I'm really rubbish at life. I can't cook. I can't drive. I kind of shamble around as a sort of husk of a human being. But I'm not bad at this.
Absolutely.
I get to do it. So I found quite a niche, and I think I'd find television quite. Television is very fast moving. There's a lot going on. I just like writing novels, so I like the expansiveness of novels and the time that you can take. So it plays to everything I enjoy.
Yeah, you can lose yourself properly, can't you, in a story like this, and just immerse yourself.
Everyone go away for 5 weeks. I've got conversations to have with made up people.
Stephanie says the book was great, filled in a lot of backstory. The pieces of Raffi's home life falling apart clarifies her actions in the show. So, yeah, she really enjoyed it. And lastly, Robin says, I read the book and I think it was the best Star Trek book I've ever read.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's some more of that, please.
There you go. We didn't even have to pay her, Una. She just said it anyway.
That's really, really good. And Duncan, I'd given a 5 or 2. So
oh, there you go. Exactly. So he's done all right. But no, generally, the feedback has been really positive. There are, when we've asked people if they've read it or they're going to read it, lots of people have bought it, and they've, some of them off the back of listening to us discuss it before when we did a podcast unpicking it and things like that. And there's a lot of people very keen, to go and read it if they haven't. But those who have are having a great time with it. And I know that my co-host Kurt really loved it as well. And I'm really not just saying this because I'm talking to you, Una. I genuinely, I sat there on the Friday last week. Was it Friday last week? Yeah, it must have been. And I sat there and I just read like 200 pages in one go.
Oh, bless you. That's really kind. Thank you very much. Do you know how long it took to write that?
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
This is it. That's just a really wonderful thing to hear, because you don't want someone to kind of open a book and go, "Oh, this is hard work." Yeah, you want it to enthrall. It's you want people to feel like they can't put it down, and it's really giving them something. And just really exciting to have it there and published with the show on. I think it just really everything felt really exciting. So I'm delighted. Thank you very, very much.
No, thank you. It's really great, and I certainly hope that you get to play again in the Picard universe one day.
So do I.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and joining me to talk about
this. Thank you. They were really great questions. Thank you.
No, well, it's the pleasure's mine. But you obviously got other things in the pipeline, haven't you? I mean, you mentioned the Destination Star Trek convention. I was there when you announced a project you've got coming up.
Yes,
which I think was very exciting. So, what's in the pipeline for you, and also where is the best place for people to find you online if they want to know a bit more?
So the next project that's coming up is my other Starship Captain book. Yeah, which is the autobiography of Catherine Janeway. So obviously we've got a big anniversary, Voyager anniversary. So and Titan have been doing these lovely autobiographies. They've done one of Picard, they've done one of Kirk, and with the Voyager anniversary coming up, they thought, Janeway is a great idea. Let's get a girl to write it. Who's a girl who writes Star Trek? Hang on a minute. So they came to me, and I finished the Picard book. I had a short working holiday in France. Then I came back and I wrote this one. So it was a real kind of, it was like a kind of suddenly surfaced from a Picard, and plunged back into Janeway.
Back into Janeway, yeah.
Yeah, and I had a blast. I'd not watched Voyager for years, absolute years. So I kind of... you can imagine me on the sofa going, 8 episodes today, we can fit another 3 in.
Yeah.
So it was a really full immersion, which is the best way to tell stories. And then it was loads of fun. She's got a very... so because they're autobiographies, they're in first person, which is just a dream to write. It's very... Once you've got the voice, it's a sort of wind me up and let me go kind of thing. And she obviously has got a great, very specific voice. And we've just had a hoot with it. I've really, really enjoyed it. I've loved going back to Voyager, and I just really enjoyed this book. So I hope people like it. That's out in June, I think.
Wonderful.
And then where to find me? I've got a website, unamccormack.co.uk, which is quite new. So it looks sort of well maintained and very pretty, really nice. And then really the other place where I am is Twitter, where I'm just swearing a lot, to be honest. So people don't like that kind of thing. I'm just kind of being grumpy. So, and that's at Una McCormack, if that sounds like the kind of thing people would enjoy reading. Yeah, people find out about signings that I've got another one up in Glasgow in a few weeks. So, and that's the kind of thing I tweet about. So,
brilliant.
If people want to get the book signed and there are any more coming up, then they can get those dates there. So yeah. I'm on Twitter making a lot of noise.
and lots of Adventures of Garak, don't you know, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast.
Tiny Garak travels around, visits all sorts of salubrious and insalubrious places.
Yeah. I mean, I follow you for plenty of reasons, Una, but I really, really, really enjoy the Tiny Garak stuff. So,
It's a legend, I have to say. It's absolutely great. He'll be travelling more, and people are now saying, "Have you got him with you? Can I have a photo?" And yeah, of course you can. so there are some personal memories there that individuals have. So, but yes, I was out at a Doctor Who convention in the States in February, and he came along and enjoyed the Pacific view.
yeah. Enjoyed crossing fandoms in something else.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been fascinating to hear your insights. And I can't wait for Janeway, the Janeway book, and more besides. So, yeah, everyone, make sure you please follow Una and check out her website and buy her books, crucially.
Yes,
that's
please,
the big thing.
Do that. That's very important.
If you haven't bought them already, get on that. Yeah, because they're all fantastic.
I agree. I endorse this speech.
We'll be back for our next episode, which I think will be episode 7 of Star Trek Picard. I think I'm hosting that one as well, so we'll be back for that very soon for our deep dive into that episode. But again, please remember to check out our Twitter at Jean-Luc Picard and our network, which is the We Made This Podcast Network at We Made This Pod. So check out that for all the other podcasts. We'll give you a little bit of a taster of what's been on the network coming up right now. But before then, just leaves me to leave with Jean-Luc's final words in maybe more of a solemn tone this time, because we've been talking about The Last Best Hope. Engage. Previously on the We Made This Network. The Time Is Now, a Millennium podcast.
And sometimes those choices are still grounded in how we play our parts with people in society, which can be doing really bad and horrible acts, and how we contend with those. And our choices can, because I mean, if you take that notion of Lucy Butler and that pure evil out of Millennium, like you say, there's so much low evil that it would still play out very similar or even identically, because things like the Millennium Group's ideological conflicts, its reasoning behind this sort of purification through fire, the whole the serial killers, the fascination the Polaroid Man has in Frank, it is all rooted within sociological and what I would call the stink of humanity.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast.
The one single reason why we should not just forget this episode, file it away, flush it down the toilet, whatever, is because of this one important thing to the entire concept of the X-Files. This is the woman that named the X-Files, and I love it because it's sort of an afterthought, or even not necessarily a mistake, but it's just a happenstance. I love it because you got too full, so it had to overflow into X. Wonderful, so fun, such a mundane little thing for such an amazing thing as the X-Files.
We dig music.
I still remember the exact first time that I knowingly heard Nick Cave, and it was in an X-Files episode. There's an episode called Ascension, which I think is the episode where Scully gets abducted by aliens, which is...
Isn't that all of them?
2. No, it fucking isn't. It was a big thing. It was
because she was the cynic. She didn't believe in aliens.
Of course.
And she was abducted by aliens, and then it was like, oh, shit, they must be real. It's not a conspiracy.
They're out there.
And all that. But Red Right Hand was...
I think Red Right Hand is the most...
It's got to be the gateway for it.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This Podcast Network. Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Picard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website www.wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.